Hello, this is David White from Sportsman's Emporium. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about the basics of fly casting, just basically how to hold the rod and how to get your line moving through the air. Really, when you're first starting out, it's hard to feel the little nuances that your fly rod does to make your line accelerate and unroll, and cast. So really, you just kind of have to start somewhere. And I'm going to go ahead and first of all talk about how to hold the rod properly. And the best way to hold a fly rod is, I'm left-handed, so a lot of people are right-handed, so you would just apply this in reverse method. But I like to grip my rod somewhere right around the middle of the grip. Sometimes I like to choke up if I have a certain rod. But the main thing is I want to hold it like this with my thumb pointed down the very back of the rod, the spine of the rod. And I always like to hold this line in my finger. And that it becomes really critical when it comes to actually fishing and catching fish. Line control is a big deal, and in order to set the hook and to strip your line, you always have to learn how to cast and put it under your line control finger and hold it. Sometimes I even hold it with all my fingers. But in general, I'm going to hold the rod like this. Now the basics of a cast and what really happens is, you see on TV, they're moving the rod back and forth, and you're just going kind of forward or backward, forward, backwards, forward, and backwards. And if you see the movie River Runs Through It, they talk about 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock. And that's right if you have that proper distance of fly line. Really what you're doing when you're fly casting is you're flipping your line backwards and you're loading the tip of your rod. And then you're going to use that tip, you're going to accelerate your rod forward with that heavy weighted line loaded on the tip, so it's actually flexing the tip, and you're going to bring it forward and stop it abruptly. When that tip stops, the line unrolls from behind it and it shoots out and lays out properly. A similar thing that you can relate it to would be if you had a stick and you put an apple on the very end of the stick and you wanted to throw that apple and control the throw without throwing it in some big uncontrolled arc. What you're going to do is you're going to accelerate that, and at a certain point you're going to stop, and that apple is going to keep going. It's the same thing with the fly line. So something that's really important, I think, is until you can begin to feel your rod tip load, you'll feel that little bend, you'll feel your line tugging on the tip of your rod in between your forward and back cast. Until you develop that feel, the best thing to do is watch it and actually turn around and watch your back cast and watch your forward cast and watch when your line unloads, because that's really what loads your line. When my line is completely unfolded behind me, that's when it loads the tip of my rod and puts the pressure on so I can accelerate forward and throw my forward cast. If you have a good back cast, it's almost hard to mess up your forward cast. So I like to tell people when I'm teaching them to always watch your back cast. Stand in sort of your baseball hitting position, stand off to the side of your cast and watch it unfold in front of you, and watch it. And if you get in the habit of watching your cast, then you start to really feel that timing come together. You see it visually, but then you begin to feel it in your hand. You actually feel the rod working, you feel the tip flexing into the grip, and that's when you can really dial in your cast. A couple other things to keep in mind when you're casting. Obviously, you get your line out behind you and you accelerate it forward. You have to find your amount of pressure. With a really heavy rod and a heavyweight line, you might be putting a good bit of muscle behind it. In general, it's finesse that makes a cast, but there definitely has to be a certain amount of oomph behind your arm and your wrist to throw that line forward and use that tip. Now, speaking of wrist, a couple things to avoid is not moving your body and your arm and just moving your wrist. That's something that you don't want to do. Is just move your wrist. When you're doing a fly cast, you really want to get your body into it, disperse disperse the energy throughout your body. You'll stay more relaxed. I like to kind of rock back and forth a little bit while I watch my cast. And like I say, if I'm pointing my thumb down the spine of the rod, basically wherever my thumb points at the end is where my line's going to go. So, you know, when you're accelerating forward, you're kind of just pointing your thumb, and you can almost give it a little squeeze, almost like opening a screen door handle. And that little squeeze on the tail end of that cast, a lot of times will really accelerate your line out there. That's just a basic forward and back cast, a basic fly cast. And you know what you're looking for to watch, you know, other than to get your fly out there. And if you're just starting out fishing, it's going to take you a while to begin to throw what they call tight loops. You just need to cast good enough to get your fly out on the water to the fish. But as you practice and as you watch yourself cast, you want to go for tight loops. You want your line to stay at a low profile. You don't want it to be big and wide open, because if it's big and wide open, the wind can blow it really easily, or you can get caught in the trees very easily. Another thing is you'd have no accuracy when your loops are wide open like that. So you need to practice the acceleration stop, you know, which could be 10 o'clock, 2 o'clock for that right line distance. But if you're shooting a lot of line, it could be, you know, a lot different. You know, it can be 9 o'clock, 2 o'clock, you know. So I mean, that's really based on your line distance, but in general that rule is pretty good basis to start from. So I'm going to step back from the camera a little bit and show the cast as it's coming together. I'm going to keep my elbow into my body. I'm not going to use too much of my wrist. I'm going to kind of use my whole upper body, and I'm going to try to keep my line profile down at a low level so I can cut through the wind and throw an accurate cast and get to the fish and really roll my line out there. You get that?